O'Hara, Lulusia Kingdom, now Egghead Island. All of these tragic incidents are precisely what make the world government my favorite dystopia in fiction. See, in dystopic fiction, there are generally three angles that can be taken. One, in which the world is blatantly dystopic and the citizens know it. This is usually where you see evil empires being overthrown. Two, is where the society is fundamentally dystopic, but not everyone in the society understands this, although it's clear to the reader from the start. And three, is where society is fundamentally dystopic, but neither the citizens nor the reader understand this initially. And this third angle is where One Piece absolutely excels. It takes 400 chapters for One Piece to be fully revealed as a dystopian fantasy, and that's because it so aggressively masquerades as just an adventure story for so long. And because One Piece chooses this angle of an extremely gradual, step-by-step unveiling of the truth underneath the surface, One Piece is able to construct a truly authentic vision of a dystopic government that is extraordinarily, convincingly plausible in its rampant yet widely unrecognized evil. And most importantly, by building up the world government like this, it sets up the single most important message the series has regarding freedom. Most readers do not understand the main point of One Piece's freedom. One Piece never actually advocates that you, the average reader, should just break all the rules and do whatever you want like Luffy. That type of freedom is all fun and games when the Straw Hats do it, but it's not actually cool in the real world. No, the actual message of the most fundamentally important aspect of freedom that One Piece promotes ties back to the most defining characteristic of what makes the world government a dystopia. So before we can get at this true message on freedom, let's break down the central defining concept of the world government and how it was subtly developed throughout the story. For the first several hundred chapters, the world government is never presented as some evil empire. In fact, for the first several hundred chapters, there's not even anything clearly, fundamentally wrong with the world government. The various nations of the world are part of this general world government. There is a police force called the Marines that helps protect people from pirates. That's all that we're really made to understand. Now, of course, we do see issues with some government figures. For example, we run into some corrupt or abusive Marines, and later on we meet a king, Wapol, who is clearly a tyrant but is still backed by the world government. However, these individuals are never presented as the norm. They are merely presented as a few bad apples that have cropped up in an otherwise standard fictional government. While Axan Morgan abused his power, the majority of the Marines at that base were honorable. While Nezumi was corrupt, Purin Purin and his Marines genuinely gave their lives trying to save innocent people from pirates. Smoker was a kind-hearted Marine, Tashigi was a kind-hearted Marine, Bellemere was a kind-hearted Marine, Kobe was a kind-hearted Marine, so on and so forth. The image we were presented early on was that despite some exceptions, the Marines are a decent and necessary police force. And with regards to the kings that made up the world government, sure, we met Wapol early on, but despite how bad he was sharply contrasted by King Cobra, who was also part of the world government and was a genuinely kind and benevolent ruler. Not to mention, it was stated that Wapol himself seemed like an exception, as his father was supposedly a kind and benevolent ruler as well. So for a long time there was no concerted effort to make the reader believe that the world government was evil, but what we didn't realize was that the occasional problems that we were seeing here and there were in fact signs of a broader underlying flawed system. Because even aside from the occasional bad actors, what we are shown are a few small but significant hints that there is in fact something deeper that doesn't quite sit right regarding the greater government. For instance, yes, it's clear that the Marines are absolutely necessary for the protection of the innocent, since there genuinely are many evil pirates trying to hurt innocent people, and most of the Marines we have met early on are genuinely good. However, at the same time, there's a certain absolutism to the Marines that seems strangely rigid, almost too uniform and dogmatic in this unflinching proclamation that they stand for justice. And beyond the Marines, we see the center of the government itself. The Gorosei don't seem evil initially, but they do seem to be very concerned with maintaining a certain status quo. A status quo that we can assume favors them as the existing government. Now again, there's nothing inherently crazy evil about that, as that's what any government at the top of the food chain in the real world is obsessed with. Though that's also partially why I find the One Piece depiction of a secretly dystopic regime to be so accurate. But the most telling moment in the first 300 chapters that nearly gives away the fundamental flaw flaw of the world government comes at the end of Alabasta, when the world government makes one very simple decision. It's harmless, completely victimless in fact, yet it says everything about the government's true nature in retrospect. The government is going to give Smoker the credit for saving Alabasta, not the Straw Hat Pirates. And this right here is the entire story of One Piece in a nutshell. The greatest evil that needs to be overcome, the problem at the root of this world, what makes this dystopia such a dangerous and yet realistic one, is that the world government always controls the narrative. Yes, countless other dystopias in fiction do so as well, but in One Piece, this is the end-all be-all trait of what the world government is. Defeating the world government is all about fighting against evil in a world where the overarching narrative of what good and evil is has been flipped on its head. See, this is why it's so important that Oda made sure that it's not apparent to the reader that the government is actually evil for the first several hundred chapters. We were able to observe small flaws here and there, but were never made to believe that the whole system was broken from the top down. This is precisely because it reflects the fact that the world government controls the narrative. We are supposed to be able to travel all across the world for a long time without realizing that the government is downright evil and will commit acts of extreme evil in order to maintain its image and its version of events, until of course the curtain is finally pulled back at Enies Lobby, and we see what the government is willing to do. This small moment of revising history in Alabasta, where the Marines were given credit for saving the day rather than pirates, was a glimpse into the government's true nature, which is that it will rewrite history on a genocidal scale if need be. If the government notices any potential threat to the status quo, label them all enemies of the state attempting to carry out terrorism, label them demons even, wipe them all out, and declare it a victory for the just regime. Think about how accurately this reflects the real world, and how supposedly just governments will vilify groups and even entire nations to create a narrative where eliminating them is actually for the good of the world. Because if a government is always controlling the narrative, then it can never be viewed in the wrong, which in turn allows it to continue committing acts of evil while the brainwashed citizens cheer it on. See, the problems that we observed early on with the Marines weren't that there happened to be some corrupt or abusive individuals here or there, it was the fact that it was generally assumed that the Marines stand for justice. All Marines, from top to bottom, are brainwashed into believing that they, as an institution, stand for justice. And if they and all citizens believe that the Marines stand for justice, then automatically anything the Marines do is inherently just. And that circular logic opens the door for the Marines carrying out absolutely atrocious acts without questioning what they are doing. So when we see abusive Marines early on, it's merely a symptom of this underlying belief that has been imposed upon all the Marines and all the citizens, that the world government is just, therefore whatever acts the Marines carry out are just. The power of controlling the narrative runs so deep that it no longer even matters if a Marine is good or bad. Smoker and Tashigi are good people, but they are also victims to the world government's dogma. Smoker views the world in simple black and white, believing that a pirate will always be a pirate. Why? Because if the world government labels someone a pirate, then they must be evil, right? Look at Aokiji and his mentality at Ohara. All he knows is that he needs to eliminate the terrorists that have been found at this island. That's the scary thing. It doesn't matter if you're a good person or not. The Marines are filled with characters who are genuinely good people but simply buy into the narrative. We all do it in the real world as well to varying degrees. If our government is reporting certain individuals as terrorists, for the most part, most people will tend to view them as terrorists. The world government will erase history, rewrite history, label anyone who threatens the status quo as criminals, terrorists, demons, and do whatever it needs to do, just as every powerful nation in the real world today does its best to rewrite history, cover up its past wrongdoings, and spin the narrative to look like the just regime. And most are successful to a far greater degree than we realize. Oda wrote a story about this type of dystopia precisely because it is the most relevant to reality, and he unveiled it to us so slowly precisely because it allows us to experience ourselves just how easily we can follow along with a government's narrative. But Oda also framed it this way because it was fundamental to us being able to understand the true message regarding what it means to be free. Not everyone in the real world can be literally free like Luffy. We can't bust out of prisons or beat up tyrants. However, what we all can do, above all else, is think freely. The message One Piece beats into our heads arc after arc is that even if the entire world is telling you that something is right or wrong, just or unjust, it is up to you to make that determination for yourself. That is what makes Luffy, Luffy. From day one, he was not interested in labels, whether someone was a demon or a monster. It was up to him to decide what he saw in them himself. The entire world can tell him that Robin is a criminal that is better off dead, but he will go to the ends of the earth to find out the truth and make that judgment for himself. Think about how many countless islands the Straw Hats have been to that are all about looking past what everyone is telling them and instead exposing the truth by following their own moral compass. See, in chapter 100, we were told that this is a story about pursuing freedom. And after Enies Lobby, when the Straw Hats rebelled against the world's notions of justice itself, we were finally told the true meaning of pursuing freedom. And that is to always question the world. This is the message of freedom that Luffy passes on to all those he meets. He is never going around telling people what to believe. Just as one authority figure might try and spin a narrative of what the people should think, Luffy will instead challenge the people of the island to think for themselves. You decide who is actually in the right and who is actually in the wrong. That is the true meaning of what Luffy states all the way back when the concept of the world government was first introduced. It doesn't matter what authority you are speaking from, be that the government, a king, or even a god, none of that makes you inherently right. That's what it means to think like a pirate. So let me know what your favorite aspect of how Oda created the world government is in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to hear how the Celestial Dragons changed the concept of One Piece's dystopia, then you can listen to this Friday's podcast by supporting me on Patreon. Link in the description below.